I'm joined by Gary Sands. He is the Senior VP of the Canadian Federation of Independent Grocers. Gary, thank you so much for joining me today on Just Good Business.
I'm really happy to join you this morning.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your organization does?
Well, there's about 6,900 independent grocers in Canada. And in some provinces, like in Ontario, for example, the majority, 59% of the brick and mortar grocery stores are independents. Now, that doesn't, of course, translate into buying power. There's the big chains out there, but there's a lot of stores, and they play a significant role in providing food to a lot of communities in the country. And what we do at the Federation of Independent Grocers is we obviously advocate on behalf of our members, both to governments, plural, and to industry in the broadest sense of the word. We also run the two largest trade show conventions / it's a combined trade show convention in Canada.
Okay.
With thousands of attendees. So that's basically what we do.
Okay, that's great. Now, you mentioned government. I mean, we just recently had the federal tax holiday, and what was the general feeling among your members about that tax holiday? Did they see any sales increase or benefits?
There were no sales increases. People don't run out when they're, especially in the food sector, you don't see consumers running out to buy things they wouldn't normally buy, right, because the GST isn't on that product. And for our members, like many other retailers, it was a bit of an administrative hassle on cost, changing the systems, and now they've had to change back again. But we didn't oppose the measure because we understood where the government was coming from. It was all about affordability for the consumers. It wasn't about helping business, and we recognize that. In fact, the announcement of the measure was at one of our member stores where the Prime Minister made the announcement. We agreed to host it, and just exactly for the reasons I just outlined. While we weren't terribly thrilled about the administrative hassle and costs, we knew,
right,
we know how much consumers are feeling around affordability.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, just to be clear, the stores didn't maybe see the benefit, but obviously anytime Canadians can save money, it's a good thing.
That was our view.
Now, sticking to politics, and obviously the big topic that's on everyone's mind, everyone's talking about it, is obviously the tariffs and the tariff threats that are coming from the U.S. How are your members perceiving these?
Well, it's something that is unprecedented in terms of what we're seeing. I mean, I myself, I can tell you, I've been with CFIG for well over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it. And this, in terms of the intensity of what we're feeling and seeing right now, it's almost back to the same feeling we had during the beginning of COVID.
Right.
But what our members are telling us is consumers are demanding, and I use that word advisedly. They're demanding. They're not asking. They're demanding to see more Canadian products and more prominent identification of what is Canadian.
Right.
Now, we've provided some additional signage to our members around, who they are, because the things we have to be careful about when we talk about buying Canadian is there's products that are product of Canada, there's made in Canada, but also there's companies that we know to the consumer are very recognizable as American companies. But let's take Pepsi, Frito-Lay, very obviously an American company, but they source their chips. All the potatoes are sourced from here in Canada. They process them at 4 plants in Canada: Alberta, Nova Scotia, Ontario, Quebec. They employ over 10,000 Canadians. How do you identify that? That's where you have to be careful about this. But I guess I would add that this isn't too much of a challenge for an independent grocer. Independent grocers already buy local, they're hiring local. They're independently owned, obviously, so they live in the communities that they serve. So this is basically part of their DNA,
right,
that they have ingrained in their business model.
Now, I mean, you mentioned the Buy Canadian movement, and of course, if you're on social media, if you're on Facebook, you see it all the time. Buy Canadian, buy Canadian. I think there's one specific Facebook group that grew to almost 1 million. I don't know if they're at 1 million members yet, but they're close, and it's a huge movement. What does that mean for purchasing decisions? Are they looking for other opportunities?
What we're seeing right now is there's definitely, as I said, the huge demand for Canadian products. And right now, good or bad, they're looking at products that are anything but American.
Right.
So even products that are coming in from other countries that aren't American, they're going there. And I have to tell you, some members are now sourcing products from other countries, and they have no option but to look at other jurisdictions now because the threat of the tariffs is there. So instead of buying your grapes and lettuce from California, for example, I know some retailers are now looking at other options in South America, for example. I think if I could just add one thing, I think what's important now for the country is this also gives us an opportunity to do a bit of a reset. We now know that I think we have to assume the tariffs are going to come in, but at a minimum, this is going to be a rough 4 years.
Yeah.
I think what Canada has to now do is start looking at what we can do domestically, not just to reduce interprovincial trade barriers and have free trade for once in Canada, but also fair trade in Canada. And what I mean by that is that we have to invest more in some of our transportation and supply chain infrastructure. We have to be able to look at the fact that we have communities where the cost of transportation distribution to those areas of the country, rural and remote, are already sometimes double what they are in other areas of the country. We have to now look at making some investments in those areas. I don't think we can now take for granted the interdependent relationship we've had with the states.
Yeah. I mean, for so long now, we've been maybe even sourcing our products up here, sending it down there to be processed, only to buy it back. And why aren't we doing that ourselves, right?
Exactly. And I think that now's the time that we have to look at that. In some ways, that's a good thing that's come out of Donald Trump and the threat of tariffs is now it's perhaps forcing Canada to do what they should have done years ago, but we've been forced by someone outside of Canada to do it.
Now, I was born and raised in the Holland Marsh in Bradford, Ontario, and of course, that's one of the biggest sources of many vegetables and produce for all of Canada, but also down in the States. So I know the demand for Canadian goods is just going to increase. Are our suppliers or our farmers, are they ready for that demand, do you think?
I think they are, but again, being ready and being able to do it are two different things. And it's going back to the point I was just making previously. It's a great thing to want to sell Canadian products in your stores and get them to them, but we have to be able to get them to those stores. Again, independents are in a myriad of rural and remote communities. I mean, they're in urban areas as well, but there's a lot of communities in this country where they're the only grocery store. So yeah, we want to be able to sell more Canadian products, but we've got to be able to get those products to those stores or we have a food security issue.
Right. Yeah, good point. Obviously, another big topic for the last few years coming out of the pandemic is inflation, right? We went through hyperinflation and then it's kind of settled down a bit, but this could lead to more. Now, what are grocers doing to maybe help curb that or manage that?
That's a tough question. And it's one that I think a lot of consumers are asking of grocers in general. But I don't want to sound like a commercial, but the fact is an independent grocer is on an overall margin of about 2%. So it's very difficult for them to do anything more than what they're already doing. And the fact is we are seeing a huge number of cost increases in goods. Now, we don't point the fingers at the suppliers. We understand what's driving up those costs, but the fact is they're still going up. Right. And if you're an independent grocer on a margin of 2%, and I'll give you an example. Next month, we are being told to be an increase in egg prices, about 50 cents a dozen.
Wow.
How do you absorb that if you're an independent grocer? So when goods go up 7, 8, 9, 10%, again, on a 2% margin, you have to pass that on to the consumer. If you don't, you're going to be out of business. So it's a good question, but it's one where I have to be honest and transparent with consumers. There's not much more that we can do than what we haven't been doing already.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, when you have stuff like bird flu and climate change affecting crops all over the place, I mean, it's what can you do, right?
And viruses, flooding and wildfires in Canada and in California. We still have the lingering effects of the Ukraine-Russia conflict going on. I've said before a few times, it's like the four horsemen of the apocalypse took up careers in the food industry. There's it's not a question of what's happened, it's what hasn't happened. And those all impact costs.
Right. So how can then Canadian businesses and consumers support the independent grocers? Obviously, shop more local. Is there anything else, though, that can be done?
It's just that, supporting the independent grocer. I think we're looking to governments to do more to support independence. In fact, that's been a recommendation of the Competition Bureau last year, that the governments, plural, federal and provincial, have to do more to provide more support to independent grocers. And that's something we'd like to see. And we've put forward a number of measures to them that too long to go into on this podcast. But there are things that government is now going to have to look at in the context of the issue of the tariffs that we were previously discussing.
Okay. And I mean, great place to end this, but if somebody wants to learn more about what your organization's doing or what is being put forth to the governments, where can they go?
They can go on our website. That's usually available in the non-gated area. There are some things on the website that are available to our members only, but that information is generally available. And anybody wants to reach out to me directly, I'm happy to provide them with some of the examples of some of the measures that we think would be helpful.
And that website is the CFIG.ca, correct?
That's right.
Right. I'll post a link to that in the show notes. Gary, thank you so much for your time today. It was great to talk to you, and you provided some great information for us to think about.
Thank you for having me.